Ted Sarandos was in the house for UFC 300 last weekend. Could that make sense as an investment? Sarandos was asked how Netflix is looking to scale its live sports offerings. He said the company is not anti-sports, but pro-profitable growth, underlining that financials are a critical factor as the streaming company pushes into live content. He added that engagement, revenue, and profit are at the core of Netflix's programming, and that the company pursues opportunities in live sports where it can drive all three. Now, my reading of that is that they're looking for cheaper live sports rights and don't want to bid on a league like the NBA. But do you have any reaction to the rumors on UFC?
Well, I think what makes sense for them, and this is where the WWE deal comes in, the WWE deal brings two important aspects to the table. Number one, it's just inventory, and it's like a regular sort of thing that has a dedicated fan base that will follow WWE to where it goes. So they have like a show every week, or is it 2 shows every week? I don't know. I've never been a wrestling fan, but I know that their wrestling's always on, right?
Email at sharptech.fm if you know.
Well, I mean, the brilliance about wrestling is, someone mentioned this a couple days ago. He's like, wrestling gives you the narrative of sports without bothering with the sports. It's just like just narrative, right? And with very athletic, like wrestling is incredibly athletic, and the capabilities of what these guys do is actually kind of amazing. But it's like it leads with narrative, and there's a bit where that is kind of a natural fit. And then also so as far as content, you have this narrative sort of regular ongoing sort of thing. And then number two, wrestling has these big events that draw people in. So it has both a marketing component that makes them sign up. Those big events are still going to be on Peacock longer, but I believe it's either built in or sort of expected that those will come to Netflix sort of in the long run as well. Those traditional sort of pay-per-view events, WrestleMania, all those sorts of things. What's going to happen to those is a little fuzzy, but I assume Netflix would want those in. But it's kind of striking. They don't necessarily need those right away to do the deal. For them, they're the exception to sports rights generally, in that they're fine with inventory. Inventory works sort of with their model. They're the base level. It's like when you talk about like power, like the power grid, you need baseline power, the power that's there all the time. And then you have other power when it's peaking and things along those lines. Netflix wants to be baseline television. It's there all the time. And then you might add or remove other streaming services or other things sort of on top of it, but they want to always be there. And I think there's an aspect there. The other thing is they can grow WWE internationally. And so that brings something they can bring to bear on these rights that will make the sport more valuable in a way the sport could not necessarily do on its own. So I think those are the important ingredients. So when you get to UFC, again, I'm not a super hardcore sort of follower or know a ton about it, but they have these regular events. You have the sort of inventory aspect. You do have the big ticket sort of headline matchups that can draw interest, and you have this ability to grow internationally. So I think it's something that does potentially make sense. One of the things you mentioned, the NBA, obviously top of mind for us. We're big NBA fans, mentioned at the beginning. They are exiting the exclusive negotiating window with ESPN and TNT, on their hands and knees begging for a streamer to save them. I think one of the challenges you hear, and it's appropriate to talk about now because the playoffs are starting, everyone wants the playoffs. No one wants the regular season, right? People want the big events that actually drive audiences. What about when you're showing games on broadcast TV that are only getting 1 million viewers? Like, that's pretty pathetic. And I think that's regular season games. Yeah. Even with headline teams. And if you don't have headline teams, it's like 600,000, 700,000.
Yeah.
So I think there's a world where Netflix would be interested in the regular season, arguably more than the playoffs from that inventory perspective. But they're going to not pay much for it at all. That's like, if you're desperate, we'll sort of pay for it. They don't want to be in a position that, and they have the luxury of doing this where they are basically paying rent and they're dependent on a thing. And then as it gets more popular, that entity gets to, negotiate more and more that money sort of away from them. The NBA also has global media deals. So like what benefit can Netflix bring to the NBA uniquely that they couldn't otherwise? It's just an aspect. The NBA is too old. It's been around long enough that Netflix can't do much for them other than give them money. And Netflix doesn't want to be in any relationships where it's just about money. Like, this is why, even with the other studios, yes, the studios are desperate, and so Netflix is getting better pricing. But Netflix has also really been emphasizing the look, you put your show on us, or even put it on your streaming service and on ours, we will make it so much more popular than it was before. This is the whole sort of Suits thing, right? And they sort of emphasize that. Like, because what is that? That's basically saying we bring something to the table that is worth more than money, which is why we should get a discount. It's the old ESPN. We should get a cheaper price on sports rights because we have SportsCenter, and SportsCenter makes your sport sort of more popular, and you'll get more time valuable on SportsCenter if you're with us. A huge part of ESPN's problems and decline is the decline of SportsCenter, which was dirt cheap programming that filled up tons of time and acted as a functional discount on their rights acquisitions, which actually, made sure they were penetrated into all these homes. They don't have that anymore. That was sort of stripped away. All they have is, we kind of need, we have, we'll pay for big events. And guess what? If you're in that spot where it's a one-to-one negotiation, you're not bringing else to the table, you're going to get squeezed for everything.
Right. Yes. And Netflix doesn't need the NBA to be a destination, whereas
they don't need it at all.
Streamer like Apple TV, they could sort of build their identity around NBA inventory if that's
the problem
direction they went.
But the problem is, if you build then you're in the wrong side of this negotiating relationship, right? Like
it truly makes no sense for Netflix. There's no value for a streamer unless you're trying to like bring people in. But in any event.
I've never thought of this honestly until now, but there is like a dark, Netflix has always denied interest in the NBA. It's always been assumed it's not a thing. I could see, and yet them it's ending floated up with
every 2 months.
Well, by the NBA, I think, but I could see them just collecting some package of regular season games and paying nothing for them, and the NBA will just fight tooth and nail to make sure that no one knows how little Netflix is paying. Just because they want to we got our games are on Netflix or whatever it might be. Think about that. The NBA would feel its reputation is burnished by virtue of being on Netflix. We're on the biggest streamer, right?
Yeah.
That's the place you want to be when it comes to negotiating for rights.
Given the NBA's struggle with audience, Netflix would definitely be a positive for the NBA.